Hello and welcome to my 20-minute tech talk on Azure Bastion. I'm Thomas Mitchell and I bring over 2.5 decades of experience in IT infrastructure engineering to this session. That's me over there on the right. Today we're diving into the world of Azure Bastion, which is a key offering among Azure's networking capabilities that facilitates secure remote access to Azure virtual machines. Now, the intent of this tech talk is to provide you with enough knowledge to really speak intelligently about Azure Bastion, whether it's with your peers or more importantly, during a job interview. You're not going to become an Azure Bastion expert by watching this tech talk, but you will be able to confidently discuss Azure Bastion should you find yourself discussing it in a job interview. Now, I don't want to bore you with all of my credentials other than to say I've been a senior level infrastructure engineer for over 25 years in the enterprise space, mostly within the Microsoft ecosystem. But what I do want to do, though, is invite you to visit my LinkedIn profile to see my complete resume. Feel free to shoot me a connection request so that you can see my complete job experience. So with that said, let's get on with it. Now, starting with the basics here, let's answer the question, what exactly is Azure Bastion? Well, what Azure Bastion is a service that represents really a shift in how we access virtual machines securely. As a fully managed PaaS offering, Azure Bastion eliminates the need for a public IP address for your VM or VMs. Instead, it allows secure, or really I should say facilitates, secure and seamless remote desktop protocol, or RDP, and secure shell, or SSH access directly from within the Azure portal. This approach not only enhances security, but it also simplifies the connectivity process. One of the standout features of Azure Bastion is its streamlined connectivity. So imagine accessing your VMs through the Azure portal or through local RDP or SSH clients, all secured via TLS encryption. This functionality really marks a departure from traditional methods, eliminating the need for additional client software or complex setups on your VMs. Instead, it's all about enhancing user convenience while ensuring secure direct access to your resources in Azure. Understanding the architecture of Azure Bastion helps in appreciating its benefits. So at its core, what Azure Bastion does is act as a bridge. It provides a secure and private link to your VMs without exposing them with public IP addresses. This architectural choice not only bolsters security, but it also simplifies the access mechanism. So whether you're a seasoned cloud professional or new to Azure, this setup ensures a reliable and protected connection to your cloud resources. Now, take a look at this Azure Bastion architecture diagram. It really does do an elegant job of mapping out the secure and simplified access mechanism that Azure Bastion provides for virtual machines in a virtual network. Starting from the left, we see that a user accesses the Azure portal through a web browser, establishing a secure encrypted connection via TLS, the standard for privacy and data integrity. This connection utilizes HTTPS over port 443, which is a well-known port for secure communications on the internet. Now, however, for those that prefer a more traditional route, you'll also see there's an option to connect via a native client, for example, an RDP or SSH client installed on the user's machine. This method also secures the connection using TLS encryption and communicates over the internet through the same secure port. Moving to the heart of the diagram here, the Azure Bastion service is centrally located. It essentially acts as the linchpin of the entire setup. It's housed within a specially designated subnet, which is called Azure Bastion Subnet. This shows the integral role within the Azure virtual network. And then here you have the network security groups coming into play. They act as gatekeepers, which in effect regulate the traffic that flows to the Bastion host to ensure that only authorized communication passes through. The Bastion service is the conduit for encrypted remote connections to the virtual machines, whether that's through RDP for Windows machines or SSH for Linux machines, which adds another layer of security to the connection. On the receiving end, we have the target VMs. These are comfortably nested in their own subnets and identifiable by their private IP addresses. These VMs stand apart, not needing to present themselves to the public internet because of Azure Bastion. The NSGs here are tuned to permit traffic for RDP and SSH from the Bastion service, which creates a secure channel for remote access within the private network. Well, what we're seeing is a well-orchestrated flow of secure connections. The user initiates a session with Azure Bastion, which then seamlessly brokers a fortified RDP or SSH session to the target VMs. By keeping the VMs off the public internet, Azure Bastion is not really just a gateway, but it's also a fortress that enhances the security and manageability of remote access in Azure's cloud environment. Now, I should note that Azure Bastion is built with a security-first mindset. What that means is that by keeping RDP and SSH ports off the internet, this significantly reduces the surface area that's exposed to potential threats. This feature is critical in maintaining a robust security posture, really, especially, I should say, in a cloud environment where access points can very easily become vulnerabilities. With Azure Bastion, you get peace of mind knowing that your VMs are accessed in a secure and controlled manner. Now, setting up a Bastion host is really a straightforward process. It involves configuring your Azure virtual networks, assigning public IP addresses, and ensuring seamless VNET peering. This setup is critical for establishing a secure and efficient remote access pathway within your Azure environment. In setting up the Azure Bastion service, what you're going to first encounter is the subscription dropdown. Now, this feature allows you to choose the Azure subscription under which the Bastion service is going to be created. In this example here, we've selected Surf City Boats. Moving on, there's a resource group section where you have the flexibility to choose the resource group that you'll want to deploy to. Resource groups are vital because they organize Azure resources into collections that can then be managed as a single unit, which in turn streamlines the management process. You'll see here we then get into instance details. Now, this part is crucial because it captures the specifics of the Bastion host you're deploying. So here you'll provide a unique name for the host under the name field. The region field follows, where you'll select the Azure region where you're going to deploy your Bastion host to. Now, it's essential to choose a region that is close to your resources that you'll be accessing in order to ensure lower latency and better performance. So you don't want to deploy Bastion in US West while your VMs are in US East. The tier section comes next. This is where you're going to decide on the pricing tier for your Bastion host. The options will typically range from basic to standard and to premium. Your choice here is going to affect not only the cost, but also the capabilities, performance, and features available for the Bastion host that you're deploying. In the instance count section, you can select the number of Bastion host instances you wish to deploy. This can be for reasons of high availability or for simply boosting performance. Then we proceed to configure virtual networks. Now, in this section, you need to specify the details of the virtual network you're going to deploy to. Under virtual network, you have the choice to either select an existing VNet where your Bastion host will reside, or you can create a new one. Now, this virtual network is crucial because it connects to the VMs that the Bastion service will provide secure RDP or SSH access to. Now, the next section is the public IP address. Now, this is important because the Bastion service requires a public IP in order to be accessible over the internet. It only makes sense. Now, you're going to be presented with an option to either create a new IP or to use an existing one. Now, depending on your requirements, you can create the new public IP address for the Bastion host, or you can choose from an existing one that you've already provisioned at some point previously. If you opt to create a new address, you'll then need to provide a unique name for it in the public IP address name field. And then following that, you specify the SKU for that public IP address in the public IP address SKU section. Now, this is going to determine features like zone redundancy and whether the assignment is static or dynamic. Now, the assignment section allows you to choose between a dynamic IP address, which can change if the resource is stopped and then started again, or a static IP address, which remains the same. Notice here you only have the option for static. And then finally, after you've configured all these settings, you click the Review and Create button, which leads you to a page where you can then review your configurations, make any necessary adjustments, and then you can go ahead and proceed to create the Bastion service. So now let's explore how VNet peering and Bastion can be used together to enhance network management and security. Now, first, what you want to do is understand how Azure Bastion and VNet peering work in tandem. So, for example, Azure Bastion can be combined with VNet peering to simplify your network deployments. When you've got VNet peering configured, there's no need to deploy Azure Bastion in each paired VNet. This means that if you have an Azure Bastion host in one VNet, it can be used to connect to VMs in a peered VNet without needing an additional Bastion host. Azure Bastion actually supports two types of peering. It supports virtual network peering, which connects virtual networks within the same Azure region, and it supports global virtual network peering, which connects virtual networks across Azure regions. Now, all that said, it's important to note that deploying Azure Bastion within a virtual WAN hub is not supported. Instead, you can deploy Azure Bastion in a spoke VNet and use the IP-based connection feature to connect to virtual machines deployed across different VNets via the virtual WAN hub. Now, when it comes to deployment, Azure Bastion can be set up in a hub and spoke or a full mesh topology. It's important to remember that an Azure Bastion deployment is specific to each virtual network, and it's not per subscription or per virtual machine. Once you provision the Azure Bastion service in your VNet, the RDP or SSH experience becomes available to all the VMs in the same VNet and in peered VNets. This consolidation of a Bastion deployment to a single VNet allows for centralization and simplification of the overall deployment process. In a typical hub and spoke architecture, the Bastion host is deployed in the centralized hub virtual network along with a centralized network security group. Moreover, a public IP is not required on the Azure VM in this setup. For deploying in this architecture, what you want to do is start by verifying that you've configured your VNets and virtual machines within those VNets. Then you configure VNet peering and set up Azure Bastion in one of the VNets. It's also crucial to verify permissions to ensure that you have the correct access for connecting to a VM via Azure Bastion. This includes having read access to the target VM, the peered VNet, and the necessary resources. So, I guess the too long didn't read version of all that is that the combination of Azure Bastion and VNet peering really provides an efficient and secure way to manage network connectivity in your Azure environment. By following these steps and guidelines, you can optimize your Azure network architecture for better performance and security. Now, in this visualization, we're presented with an Azure network topology that integrates the Azure Bastion service with VNET peering in a hub and spoke model. This model exemplifies the strategic architecture within Microsoft Azure for secure, efficient, and really centralized network connectivity. At the heart of the diagram here is the hub VNet. It's designated with the IP address range of 10.110/23. Now, within this hub, the Azure Bastion service resides on that specifically defined subnet that I mentioned earlier, the Azure Bastion subnet. This service is pivotal as it provides secure remote access protocols, particularly RDP and SSH, which are essential for remote management of the virtual machines. The Bastion service acts as a gatekeeper and facilitates connections that are safeguarded by TLS encryption. Azure Bastion establishes a secure encrypted channel for remote management sessions. These sessions originate from the Microsoft Azure portal and then traverse the internet over port 443. This approach negates the need for public IP addresses on individual VMs, which is what we mentioned earlier, thereby enhancing the security posture of the network. Now, flanking the hub here are two spoke VNets. They have IP ranges of 10.130 and 10.150, both /23 respectively. Each spoke is configured with its own subnets and houses virtual machines that are protected by network security groups, or NSGs. These NSGs essentially act as firewalls that control inbound and outbound traffic to the VMs and subnets. Connecting the hub to each spoke is VNet peering. These connections are depicted by the lines between the hub and spoke VNets. VNet peering allows network traffic to seamlessly flow between the VNets as though they were a part of a singular network environment. This transitive networking really facilitates the centralized management we talked about without compromising on network isolation. Now you'll notice the arrows extending from Azure Bastion service to the spoke VNets. These illustrate the core benefit of this architecture, which is that centralized remote access management. Azure Bastion, which is situated in the hub VNet, provides its service to the spoke VNets without the need for additional Bastion hosts, which streamlines network management and reduces overhead. So really, to wrap things up here, the diagram here encapsulates a really robust framework for centralized network administration within Azure. It underscores the utility of Azure Bastion in conjunction with VNet peering to foster a secure, manageable, and cost-effective, for that matter, network topology. This architecture is an embodiment of Azure's capability to provide scalable and secure network infrastructures for really enterprises of all sizes. Essentially, Azure Bastion is the ideal solution when you need secure, essentially hassle-free RDP or SSH access to your VMs. It shines in scenarios where traditional network security group configurations are really cumbersome or inadequate. Azure Bastion is especially beneficial in environments where quick, secure, and easy access to VMs is a priority without the interest in dealing with the overhead of extensive configuration or third-party tools. So to conclude today's tech talk, Azure Bastion really stands as a secure, easy to manage, and scalable solution for remote access within Azure. Its integration into the cloud infrastructure really can significantly enhance management efficiency and security. So with that, I want to thank you for joining this Tech Talk, and I look forward to bringing you more insights into Azure and other cloud technologies in future Tech Talks.